So this is an overview of how to play my role-playing game. I'm going to do an instructional video or 2 or 3 instead of the arduous task of actually trying to write manuals to do it. Video is a lot easier, faster, and lazier, which is just my speed. So this is called the JRAS system. It stands for Just and Read Advanced Systems. No shortage of creativity here. It's loosely based on the GURPS system and has not a whole lot to do with Dungeons and Dragons, except for the fact that I do steal a lot of creatures and items from D&D, but the gameplay is entirely different, as you'll see. So here is our online character sheet. I programmed it mostly in PHP and JavaScript, and it is kind of buggy, but it works a little better than other ways that we've been using. So keep in mind that it's an advanced system, so it's a little bit more complex than, say, D&D. But we'll get into all the rules and stuff, and once you learn them, it's, you get accustomed to them and it becomes second nature. So we will start with the attributes. So it has a lot more attributes than D&D and a whole lot more attributes than GURPS. GURPS only has 4, and I have expanded them to 16. I did this to give a little bit more granularity, a little bit more customization for each character. And we'll go over the attributes and what they're all for. Strength is kind of obvious. Strength is pretty much how much a character can lift. Of course, bending bars, lifting gates, just like in D&D. It's just pure physical strength. Now, strength isn't actually rolled. All the attributes are rolled, and we'll get to that in a second. But strength isn't rolled. Strength is determined by taking the average of health, endurance, and build. And we'll get to that in a second. So dexterity is how dexterous you are. Surprise. That has to do with hand-eye coordination and kind of, fiddly things that you do with your body, such as picking locks, throwing and catching. Has a lot to do with dexterity, and just kind of how good your hand-eye coordination is really the easiest way to describe it. Agility, on the other hand, is how flexible you are. So say, can you do the splits? Well, what's your agility? How fast your reflexes are. So that also figures a little bit into catching. And, kind of just how spry you are, spry on your feet. They are completely different. Some people have a problem differentiating between the two, but you learn it as you go. Health is how healthy you are in general. So how prone you are to disease, how quickly you heal, how easily you can fight off disease, and things like that is determined by your health. Endurance is more like how far you can run or swim before you get tired. How well do you take pain? How easily can you fight off a stun or getting knocked out? That's endurance. Build is just how physically large your body is. So the larger your build, the bigger you are. So you take these 3 attributes, health, endurance, and build, and you average them, then you get your strength. Comeliness is how good looking you are. It's your physical appearance, scars, burns, how well they heal, just beauty. I consider this to be one of the least important attributes unless you're trying to be a super charming person. Which brings us to personality. That is how charming of a person you are. A low personality means you're a jerk. High personality means people just like you. But This is not specifically a definition of those things. This merely gives you a boost to those things depending on how you want to play your character. If you yourself have a hard time talking people into things or talking yourself out of situations, your personality will help you, but it will not act for you completely. Knowledge is your propensity to learn new things. If you have a high knowledge, you're kind of a bookworm. You like to study trivia, facts, history, that kind of thing. Your knowledge is really how well you remember things. So if you're ever in a position where you need to recall something from times past, I usually make you roll versus knowledge to see if you remember that. And knowledge contributes to a lot of skills as well that are knowledge-based skills, such as piloting over here. Piloting is going to have some knowledge involved because you have to remember all the rules and all the stuff that you've learned about flying or driving or whatever. Reason is how well you can figure things out. Kind of your IQ. How well can you solve puzzles? How well can you kind of break down what's going on around you and figure out what the next move is going to be? You know, strategy, that kind of thing. Perception is how aware you are of the world around you. So if you look down here, you have sight, hearing, alertness, taste, smell. This is actually taste and smell, and then touch. All of these are based off of your perception. You never actually roll perception. You add modifiers to it to define how good you are at these, and you will get to kind of choose which ones you're best at. Or say you want your character to have a better sight than hearing, you can go ahead and define that, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, that is the end of the kind of static attributes, and now we head into the dynamic attributes. The last 5 attributes are what I call dynamic attributes. That is, they are used to modify dice rolls in the game, and it's the first line of defense when it comes to letting the players have a little bit more control over the world, as opposed to just letting the game master kind of railroad you into what the game master wants you to do. These points here are used to modify dice rolls, and we'll get to that in a minute, a little later, but just keep that in mind, that you can modify dice rolls in this game. Catch, throw, dodge, and initiative are all calculated based on, say, agility and dexterity for catch and throw. Dodge also has some perception thrown in there. Can you see it coming? Agility goes into perception or initiative. Initiative is how quickly you react, and those numbers are here. They just happen to all be 14. There's a little formula involved. I won't get into it now, but just so you know, you don't actually roll these. They're determined from above attributes. Catch is obviously how well you can catch things. Throw, well, that's how well you can throw things. Now, you can have skills that you take that will allow you to throw better. Like, say you're throwing a weapon that's intended to be thrown, and if its level is higher than this, then you just go ahead and use that instead of your catch. Dodge is only used to get out of the way of things that are flying through the air. It is not to be used for, say, dodging a sword or a punch or a kick. It's only used for things that are flying through the air, such as an arrow, or somebody throws a rock at you, or, you know, there's a wild bison that's been blown by a tornado or something. You would use dodge to get out of the way of that. Initiative is used to determine, you roll against initiative, and it is used to determine who goes first. That's a lot like D&D, except in JRAS things are a little bit different on how you roll skills and saving throws. Sight, hearing, alertness, taste, smell, and touch. Those are pretty self-explanatory. You use those. Sometimes the game master will, you'll be out in the forest, you'll be on a trail, and the game master will go roll sight or roll alertness or roll your best perception attribute. And you go, okay, well mine happens to be alertness, so I'm going to roll against that. And everybody rolls, and we'll get into rolling on skills later, but that's what they roll to see, oh, maybe there's an ambush or something ahead. Now let's go over the columns here in the attributes. When you're rolling up an attribute for JRAS, again, you do not roll strength. You only roll these attributes here. And you can place your rolls wherever you want. So I suggest that when you're rolling up your attributes, you just write them down. And then when you create a new character sheet, you would put your roll skill or what you rolled over here. And that will populate this stuff for you. Bonus is used for, maybe down the road you increase an attribute, and you put your bonus here and it'll add those together and put your new value over here. Racial bonus, if you're not human, so we have race up here. If you're not human, we have a bunch of races. Most of them are specific just to JRAS. Those will change some of your attributes accordingly. Such as the Busk is a very large, very strong, but kind of clumsy race that I base the Busk off of the Fessig and Princess Bride. So big, lumbering, strong, that kind of thing. So anyway, the point is, you choose a race, it'll change these racial bonuses for you. Highly suggest you choose a race before you fill anything else in, because you'll get to see the racial bonuses, and then you'll be able to place these however you want them, and that'll help you determine what how you want to customize your character with the attributes that you want. Save number is half of your value rounded down. Easy as that. A lot of the times I'll have you roll against an attribute, and you usually roll against this number. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but the higher this number, the better. If it happens to be something that's super easy to overcome, like a super easy thing to save against, I'll have you roll against the value instead of the save. And that makes it a lot easier. Now, when rolling up attributes, let's pull up Roll20 here. We use Roll20 a lot when we're playing because it's just kind of made for role-playing games specifically, and it does a really good job for us. You can actually see each other webcam feed in here, and it also does audio, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the rule is 2 dice 10, but you re-roll 1s, and sometimes you re-roll 2s. It depends on the campaign. So if we're doing a superhero campaign and rolling up new characters and everybody's supposed to be awesome, sometimes I'll say re-roll 1s and 2s, but usually it's re-roll 1s. So this, you'd have this 8 and you'd re-roll this 1. That was the wrong dice. So we have an 8 and we have a 3, so that would be an 11. So we go back over here and we write down 11. Eventually it'll go into one of these. So it's really 2 to 20. Sometimes it's 4 to 20, and sometimes it's 6 to 20, depending. So here we see that good old Meat Shield, that's his nickname, rolled a perfect 20, and he happened to put it on health, because he wanted his guy to be super healthy. Thus, the term meat shield. He's actually the guy he's the tank. He takes all the damage. So you roll all these, 2 to 20, or 4 to 20, or 6 to 20, depending on if we're re-rolling 1s, 2s, or 3s. Once you have all of them, you re-roll the lowest one. So you get to basically throw out your lowest one and re-roll it, and it has to be higher than that lowest. So say you rolled a 6 and you record a 6. If you re-roll it and it comes out a 5, then you can discard that and re-roll again until you get higher than a 6. So easy enough. Now, this skill save, it's highlighted everything, but the save column is also what is used to determine the starting level of skills that you take. So, unlike D&D or other level-based games where, you go up a level and all of a sudden everything is better. Your attack is better, your defense is better, your saving throws are all better. In JRAS and in other games such as GURPS, you actually take skills. You determine right at the beginning, what do I want my character to be? Do I want him to be more roguish? Do I want him to be more wizardy? Do I want him to be more paladin-y? Or in this case, this is a steampunk superheroes game. And, Meat Shield is a tank. He doesn't have a whole lot of attack skills, sorry. Let's move on to Emerson here. And he has law. He's a cop. He's actually a marshal. He's got some acrobatics and brawling and concealment driving. Okay, he's got all this stuff that he has, the player himself, bearded guy, has decided that he wants to take at the beginning to define his character. And he gets to choose those. There's a drop down here. It has a whole bunch of skills that you can take. Some of them are only good for certain genres. You're not going to be able to take cybernetic engineering if you're doing a fantasy medieval world, unless you got a weird fantasy medieval world. That's fine. It's up to you if you're game mastering. But the numbers in the parentheses here is what your skill starts out at, what level your skill starts out at. The higher, the better. So, brawling, if he took brawling, which I think he already has, he would start off at 9. And brawling is, you don't see the formula, but it's probably based off of dexterity and agility rounded up or something like that. So, each one of these attributes is important to determine the base level, here of your skills. And then after that, you use attributes to do saving throws and stuff like that against certain things. After you have your base level, you can buy additional points in each skill to make them higher. And with your skills, it's the higher the better. Now, much like GURPS and a couple of other systems, the way you roll against a skill is you roll a 20-sided dice and you try and get as far below the skill as possible. So if you have a 16, a 1, if you roll a 20-sided dice, you get a 1 to a 16, you have successfully completed that skill. Obviously, here's a 19. Wow, you have only a 5% chance of failing that in certain circumstances. We'll get into that in a second, but as far as acrobatics and gymnastics here, he's got, a 45% chance of successfully completing this skill. Say he needs to do a tumble, or he needs to jump and grab a rope, or he needs to do kind of a tightrope walk across a small beam, across a chasm or something. He would roll versus acrobatics or gymnastics, and that's what it would be. that's where we get into the contest of skills, which is when you're rolling against someone else. So let's take Dungeons and Dragons, for example. You roll a 1 dice 20, and there are modifiers based on your level and maybe your strength, a couple other things, dex. I haven't played it in a while. And then also modifiers based on the enemy's armor, their armor value, or all of these things added together that creates armor value that changes dice rolls. Well, in my game, in JRAS, you're actually doing a contest of skills. And this is also, I took this straight from GURPS. And that is, let's say you're fighting somebody, and so Brave Star has a 19 in brawling. So he would roll his attack. So we'll just go over here and roll his attack. So he rolls a 1 dice 20 in roll 20, so everybody can see him and laugh at him if he fails miserably. And he rolls a 3, so he made it by 16. He got 16 under this, so he made it by 16. That's really good. But let's say as a game master, he's fighting a guard, and this guard's in a pretty well-established kind of richy-rich organization, and they hire pretty good guards. So I'm going to say that the guard has a skill of 18. So I roll versus the guard. 11. So I made it by 7. So he made it by 16. He made his attack by 16. I made the guard's defense by 7. So overall, he made his attack by 9. So he can then do damage to that guard based on certain things. When it comes to brawling, your strength is added and all that kind of stuff. We'll get into that later. But then it is the guard's turn to attack, because I promise you a single hit, even making it by that much, isn't going to knock him out. So then it comes the guard's turn to attack. And remember, I assigned him an 18 skill on, we'll say it's a martial art or something, because they're this organization's hoity-toity and they spend lots of money to get awesome martial artists. So he rolls out, he gets a 9. So he made his skill by 9. So now he has to roll a 10 or under to block, because he has a 19. And he didn't. He made it by 7. So he got hit by 2 points. He got hit, and there's 2 points left over that the guard can use for other things. I'll explain that in a minute. In case of a tie, and this is very important, let's say the guard attacks and makes it by 12, and Brave Star defends and makes his defense by 12 also. All ties go to the defender. So Brave Star would successfully have defended that attack. So that's how skills work when it comes to a contest of skills. You're rolling against somebody. You're rolling your skill against their skill, or your skill against their perception, say. So let's say that Brave Star needs to stealth, needs to sneak somewhere, super sneaky, but he only has a 9. These raise over time. Your skills will rise over time, but right now he's only got a 9. He doesn't do a whole lot of sneaking because he's a marshal, and he just kind of arrests people. But let's say he has to sneak somewhere, and we'll say he rolls a stealth and he rolls a 2, and he's like, yeah, he made it by 7. That's awesome. So let's say now I need to see, he's going kind of behind a guard. He's going, maybe through some bushes, but behind a guard and around a corner. The guard gets to roll because he's out there guarding. It's his job. He gets to roll versus, say, sight or hearing or alertness, depending on what the game master decides. So let's say if he's on concrete, there isn't anything like rustling, he might roll against hearing. And the game master will either determine, what his hearing is based on just common sense, or he might roll. He might roll perception and decide what to put in hearing. And that reminds me, I need to get back to that in a minute, because I didn't tell you how to roll those. But anyway, So he made his stealth by 7. So I'll say the guard's going to roll hearing, and the guard has an 11 hearing. And so the guard rolls, and he gets a 9. So he made his hearing by 2. Well, that's not good enough to hear him, so Bravestar has successfully sneaked past the guard. Now, what if they both made it by the same amount? He rolls a 2, and he rolls a 4. So they both made it by 7. Well, all ties go to the defender. Well, who's technically the defender in this case? Well, I would say, and the rule I usually use for stealth is, if you're just trying to get past somebody and get out of kind of harm's way or just get past them, then the person doing the stealthing is the defender. But if you're sneaking up on somebody to do harm to them, like backstab or a takedown, knock them out or something like that, then the person who's rolling, who's being snuck up on, is the defender. So the tie would go to them. So if you're game mastering, you can use, whatever rule you want to on who the defender is, but the defender always wins the ties. Okay, sorry, I forgot about all this stuff. We're going to go back to attributes really quick, and this is really super easy, simple. There's 5 of these. Okay, taste and smell go hand in hand, so I made them just one attribute. And you decide which one you want, when you're rolling up your character, which one you want to be the best at here, to have the highest in. Usually people pick sight. So you take that one, you take your perception save number, and you add 5 to it. So that's why we have a 13. You take your next favorite one, and you add 3 to it. Your next favorite one, you add 2 to it. Your next favorite one, you add 1 to it. And your next favorite one, you add 0 to it. So perception, save by itself, no modifiers. So 5, 3, 2, 1, 0. That's all you need to do. Sometimes that needs to be repeated a lot, but I guess you can just rewind. I'll repeat it. +5, +3, +2, +1, and +0 in order of your favorite to least favorite attribute that you want your guy to have, added to your perception save. Now, usually, I don't know why he didn't, but usually you put your perception save roll here, so these would all be 8, and then you put your bonus as 5, 3, 2, 1, 0, wherever you want them. It's okay whichever way you do it, as long as you end up with the correct number in your save area here, your save column here. So sorry about that little backtracking. So you'll notice that Emerson here, Bravestar, he does have a sword skill of 13, which is lower than his brawling skill. So you're thinking, why would he need sword and brawling? That's a good question. I kind of asked him that too. Technically you don't, but brawling's kind of fun because brawling allows you to pick up anything that you're strong enough to pick up and use it as a weapon, which is kind of fun. So when you're rolling up a character for the first time, what will happen is you'll get a blank character sheet and there will be one skill and it'll be survival. That's kind of an inside joke, sort of a long story, but it'll be survival. Your base will actually show 0, which makes sense because you won't have any attributes listed here yet. But feel free to, delete it or just leave it and take other skills around it. But you'll start with survival and you'll start with a backpack over here in your items. Then you can use the drop-down list to choose whatever skills you want to take based on kind of the class. We don't have classes per se, but you do kind of determine, I want him to be a rogue, so I'll take, we have a rogue over here, Kita. So Kita has climbing and false trail, which is kind of like creating a trail that looks like you're going somewhere else to follow. It's kind of a recently added skill. Pickpocket, sleight of hand, stealth, streetwise, which is very important for a thief to have. Kept survival, traps. Traps is cool. So the person playing this character decided that they were going to take all these skills and got them in the drop down and took a lot of skills. You usually don't start with this many skills because you have a certain number of skill points to spend on them at the beginning. So Emerson here took fewer skills, and you'll notice that diving and law do not have a base level, and that's because they are not part of the regular skill list. Didn't really think about it. So we have diving, and he wanted to be a diver, even though for some reason he's got no points into it. And law, he wanted to be a cop. Actually, I kind of talked him into it, but that's another story. So I say, hey, take a skill called law. And if it's not in the drop down, you just go down here and you type in the skill name and you click add or hit enter or something. And it adds that skill as a custom skill to your list. And since there's nothing in the database that says, what a new skill should start at, it always starts at base 0. You do get a base that's dependent on what your attributes are, but you and the game master kind of have to hash it out at the beginning. You can't change this number. This number is not editable. So it'll just be 0, and then you and the game master kind of determine, well, this is law. It's mostly knowledge. You got to know all the different laws. So it's going to be almost completely knowledge, maybe some reason, maybe a little perception even, So you average those saved numbers together and you put that as your level, which is your base level. And then you add points to it as you go. So you can do custom skills, go over it with your game master and make sure it's a skill that the game master actually allows you to take, because there are some skills that are way out there that you can come up with, but that is basically how you take skills. I generally suggest you take between 7 and 10 skills to begin with, because you're going to get points to distribute amongst them to bring them up. And I have a rule where you have to spend at least 1 point on each skill, or bring each skill up by 1 level, depending on how many points you spend on it. So that really makes you run out of points fast if you have a whole bunch of skills. But it is less expensive skill point wise, or experience point wise, however you want to call it. It is less expensive to take a skill at a really low level early on than it is to add the skill later. So that's something that you might want to think about. And that is the strategy that the person playing Keto was using by taking all these skills at the beginning. A lot of them are, low to medium now. This person's been played a decent amount, but they won't have to spend as many points down the road to bring those skills up as they would to have to buy the skill from scratch. And yes, you can buy skills that you don't have later on. Now we get into something that's kind of difficult to explain well. A lot of players have a hard time understanding this, and that is, skill difficulty. So DIFF here stands for difficulty. The easy way to describe it is, how difficult is this skill to learn as a skill? So something like a martial art is a difficult skill to learn because there's so much to it. There's kicks and there's punches and there's locks and holds and katas and lots of training, lots of going and practicing. So I call that a very hard skill. You'll notice that we have easy, average, hard, very hard, impossible. Impossible doesn't mean it's an impossible skill to learn. It means that it looks impossible to an outside observer. And we'll get to that. And we might never get to that, except maybe in gameplay. But this is the minimum. There are minimums to skills, such as medicine. If you want to be a doctor, you have to take your skill at least very hard. You can't take an average difficulty skill and be able to do all the things a doctor can do, like surgery and knowledge of medicine, or all the medicines and all that kind of stuff. So obviously, where this is going, this determines how expensive the skill is to take up. So at the end of every adventure, you get a certain number of skill points or experience points, and you spend them to bring this level up. This level has a maximum of 25. So if you go to, let's jump to one of the campaigns that, Edward here, herbalism, dragon biology, magic, demon, all these lore skills. He's been playing this guy a long time. He's got a bunch of 25s. So jump back to Steampunk Supers. I don't know why, but there's a bug I gotta fix. Anyway, diving. Oh, this is why he doesn't have any on diving. There are also hobby skills. We'll get to that in a minute, but hobby skills are kind of non-skills, but they're still helpful. So he's working on, getting guns and brawling and probably law up first to 25, but these are all very hard. So it's going to take him a longer time to get them up there than, say, a hard or an average or an easy skill. But it's worth it because those skills give you more things. You can do more things with a very hard medicine skill than you can do with, say, an average first aid skill. With first aid, you can stop bleeding and maybe get someone out of shock and, put them in the recovery position and that kind of stuff. But you certainly can't do surgery or put in an IV or anything like that like you can with a very hard medicine skill. So that's why they're more expensive. So given that, here's where it gets a little confusing. If you want to take a skill at a higher difficulty than its minimum difficulty, you certainly can. So gambling here, I would not consider a hard skill for the minimum amount you need to know to be a gambler. I would say average. Average might be a good one to learn. Okay, you know how to play poker and you know how to maybe play roulette. But he chose to take it at very hard. And what that does is when you take up the difficulty of the skill, it gives you a broader definition of what you can do with that skill. So at very hard, you can do all of the games, Baccarat and, craps and just all the games, and you're as good at them as your level. Where some people get confused is that they think that somebody with a 16 average playing poker going up against somebody with a 16 very hard is not going to do as well. But that's not true. A 16 is a 16 is a 16. You're still rolling against each other at that level. It's just that a higher difficulty level allows you to do more things in that skill, not necessarily do them better. So guns here at very hard, anybody can learn to shoot a gun. You could take guns at average and still have an 18, but you won't be able to shoot as many different kinds of guns as somebody with a hard or a very hard or even an impossible gun skill. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is that very hard or higher, very hard or impossible 2 or all those, allow you to take your level up to 25. A hard skill only allows you to take your level up to 23. An average skill only allows you to take your skill up to a 21. And an easy skill only allows you to take it up to 19. So yeah, it's super cheap. They're not very many skill points are needed to bring them up, but you are restricted on how high you can take them. So you have to think about that as well. Now, hobby skill, you don't actually spend points on. Every character is given 5 hobby skills, and you don't even have to take them at the beginning. You can decide them as you go. But once you take them, you can't change them very easily, because that'd kind of be cheating. I mean, not cheating, but it'd kind of just be like, oh yeah, I can do that instead of this now. So hobby skills are like skills light. So the example I always use for people is swimming. It's a very good idea to take swimming as a hobby skill. If you fall in the water and you don't have swimming at least as a hobby skill, you're going to drown. But if you take it as a hobby skill, you know how to tread water, you know how to swim, you can do backstroke maybe. You don't need to take it as a skill in order for it to keep you alive. Okay? If you want to be like a professional, Olympic swimmer, then yeah, you take it as a skill, and maybe even at very hard, and then you take it up that way, and then you're doing a contest of skill against other swimmers and stuff like that. But as a hobby skill, you don't roll against it. It doesn't have a level. You just know basics within that skill. And that's why he took diving. They needed somebody that could go into, one of those old-timey diver suits, that had the air hose pumped into it and just go down and search for something. And so I said, does anybody here have diving? And everybody's like, no. And he decided, well, I'm going to take it as a hobby skill. As long as he doesn't have to do anything like crazy with it, like fight someone off where it actually require a skill, I think that's okay. Let him take diving, he can go down, he can look around, he can come up. Another popular hobby skill is riding, like horseback riding. If you're in the medieval world, you kind of need to be able to ride a horse, but you want to spend points on it? Probably not. So you take that as a hobby skill. Now, if you wanted to do competitive horseback riding, such as like jousting or horse racing or cross-country horse racing or something like that, you're going to want to take it as an actual skill and spend points on it. But really, it's if all you want to do is be able to ride a horse around so you don't have to walk everywhere, taking it as a hobby skill is just fine. Now, this particular table here allows you to reorder your skills. It's the only reorderable table on the whole page here. And usually people put their hobby skills at the bottom. I don't know why he didn't, but you can rearrange them however you want. Okay, I know you're dying to know what this mastery column is. Now, in the spirit of, allowing more customization, I like people to be able to customize their characters as much as possible and be able to have a unique character. We have a couple of different things that will do that. Mastery is one of them. Another thing that I skipped over before, and because it kind of belongs in this session, is cat over here. Actually, it's badly named. It's originally was for category. It stood for category, but it's kind of taken on a different meaning now. I still call it category. I cringe every time I say it because it's not really what it is. But we'll get into mastery, category, and good old global mastery here as well in this section. Now, there's 2 different types of skill mastery, combat and non-combat. So diving would be considered a non-combat skill, same as, law and acrobatics. Brawling is a combat skill. So is sword. And I wouldn't call quick draw a combat skill, even though it's used to draw your weapons quickly. But guns certainly is a combat skill. Gambling, driving, concealment, not so much. So those are non-combat. So through the course of playing your game and becoming better at things, the game master will give out mastery. Usually it's on birthday games or holiday games. If we're playing around someone's birthday or holiday, game master gives out stuff. It's very difficult to be able to buy, say with skill points, mastery, and I'll show you why here in a minute. So we have a couple of mastery charts. We have the non-combat mastery, and I really hate I don't know why my my background switch to a dark theme isn't working, but you'll see there's a couple of empty slots here. Don't worry about those. But so for non-combat mastery, you can see all these different things. We've got efficiency, so they can perform a skill at twice normal speed, or in half the time at half the cost. You can teach the skill. You can do the skill for twice as long without getting tired. This is a big one that everybody likes to get. Can do other physical tasks while performing skill with no modifier. So the reason why we can't really have a point system to buy mastery is because certain things in mastery are much better for certain skills than others. For instance, stealth here, if you have a mastery of weather, has no effect on how well this character does this skill. If you put it on stealth, that means they're not leaving footprints in the snow, kind of like that. I mean, it's not that powerful, but it's really a, you know, the weather isn't going to affect them at all when they're doing this skill. Well, that is amazing for stealth. It's also amazing for survival. Can you imagine? You need to roll survival to start a fire, and it's just pouring rain, but you have weather has no effect on how well a character does a skill. So that pouring rain isn't going to affect your fire starting abilities at all. But if it's on quick draw, well, that doesn't do quite as much good. You know, okay, it's snowing, it's windy, you can still draw your gun just as fast. Or gambling, you usually do your gambling indoors. Most of the time you're not going to be out where wind is blowing all your cards around and stuff like that. So it's not that big of a deal when it comes to gambling. So it's really a matter of, you know, which skill are you going to put these types of things on. And so the game master kind of has to decide, and this is very important, has this character been doing stuff in game? Have they been role-playing their character in a way that it makes sense to give them that kind of mastery? Are they doing, you know, stealthy stuff in bad weather or whatever? Well, if the answer is yes, then maybe on the next birthday or holiday game, they'll get that mastery. So weather has no effect, fear has no effect. There's a lot of different things here. You can just pause the video and look at them. But a lot of them are really cool. Some of them make absolutely no sense for most of the skills, but they're still there. They still get given out, and they're pretty cool. So let's say we have, we'll just take this away, but K and L on diving. If I hover over the question mark, let's refresh it. Probably have to refresh it. And of course, it picks this time to not work. So maybe that's a bug in the system. Usually, okay, I'm going to have to make a bug report here. See, because it's taken away that L. Okay, so I hover over it and it says weather has no effect on how well a character does this skill. I'll have to fix that a little later, but you get the point. Now for combat skills, it's a similar thing, but it's just a different list. So here's all your combat-based mastery. Weapons catch, so you can, like, you know how in ninja movies somebody will be swinging a sword and they'll be like, bam, and they'll catch the sword between their hands. That's what this allows you to do. This pinpoint accuracy is like the brass ring of weapon skills, and I'll get into that later, but pinpoint accuracy allows you to do a lot more damage, stuff like that. Mastery disarm, you can disarm foes easier, that kind of thing. Go ahead and pause the video and look over these. Some of them are really cool, some of them not so much. But again, you know, it's nice to get some of these things on your skills, because not only does it help you, does it make that skill more powerful, but it also helps customize your character and make them more well defined and not like the other characters. Now, mastery can also have a number. So you can have, let me see if I can get into Edward again. So he has a 3 on here and a GG. So characters not subject to pain modifiers from critical hits when performing the skill. So that's really cool. You know, that's a good thing to have. But he also has a 3. And he has a 3 on demon lore and a 3 on undead lore and a 1 on his staff skill. The numbers will cancel out any negative modifiers that I put on the skill. So let's say, and this is a kind of a funny example, let's say he's casting a spell, but the weather is really bad. Okay, he doesn't have good old K, so bad weather is going to affect his concentration. So I say, okay, you need to cast this spell. He has a 25, so he's really only going to fail if he rolls a 20. I'll get into that later, but 20 is an automatic fail, which is hard to get used to from D&D when 20 is an automatic critical. But his odds of failing are very low. But let's say, oh, the wind is blowing and there's hail coming down and lightning and thunder is distracting you. I'm going to give you a -10 to cast this spell. So now he's got to roll a 15 or better or under. Well, okay, that's going to make it a little bit difficult. So he has to roll 15 or under. But this 3 cancels out 3 of that -10. So now, instead of a -10, he's only at a -7. That's what that's one of the things it does. If it's on something that's combat related, such as staff, he gets to add that to his damage. When all is said and done. It's only 1 point, but you can get mastery way up, you know. It's not unheard of to have a mastery above 15. So, you know, adding that to damage is actually a really big deal. And it can be added to other things too, but we'll talk about that when we get into combat. So over here to categories, well, it's the same kind of thing as mastery, but it's given to you based on your attribute. So every attribute, if you click on the question mark, gives you all of these charts look horrible, and I'm sorry about that, but I just haven't taken the time to fix them up. So here's dexterity. So here's all the things that you can get to aid in skills and rolls and saves that have to do with dexterity. Let's say you have superior hand-eye coordination. That'll give you a +5 on a negative modifier. So if you happen to have a D on dexterity and you're trying to throw something, say you need to throw something from a moving horse through a hoop and the horse is going 30 miles an hour and you're standing on your head and, you know, let's throw weather in, the wind's blowing. I might say you're at a -10 to do that, or a -15. Well, you'd be like, you cancel out 5 of those. I'm only at a -5. So that's how that particular thing works. There's something for almost every attribute here, including sight, hearing, alertness, and taste, smell. So agility has things that, oh, your agility's so good you happen to be a contortionist. It gives you a +5 negative modifier cancellation on escape rolls. So escape is, you know, when you're tied up, you're bound somehow, and you have an escape skill, and you roll your escape skill, and it's a contest of skills versus the guy who tied you up's rope skill, you know, but it's not a regular escape skill that you're rolling because you're on a train, and the train is rocking back and forth, and there's all this, you know, stuff happening and fireworks, and okay, the game master says you're at a -7, and you can say, no, I have a +5 negative modifier cancellation on escape because my agility category, now I'm only at a -2. Okay, yeah, you get it. There's all sorts of really cool things. You click on them. Health, endurance. Build is recently added. It's really kind of cool and funny in some ways. I really like all the build categories. Calmness is real small. So that's like how good looking you are, how pretty you are. So things heal with no scarring, or you get a reaction bonus when somebody's coming up to you and going, wow, you're really pretty. And they need to roll versus their willpower, and, maybe they fail because you have a +5 on that to roll against them. Stuff like that. Categories generally, like, the numbers don't work the same way. You can see that there are actually numbers that just mean things. Usually you only have one letter and one number, and it's generally A1, which is normal. You don't get anything special. Certain races have categories assigned to them. So not in this iteration of my online character sheet, though I haven't added them yet. So it won't, right now it won't pre-populate categories if you change race, but that's on the list of additions. But humans are not restricted to what categories they can have. So when you roll up a character, you actually get with the game master and you go, okay, you rolled really well on this. Edward's not a good one to do because he's been around so long and he's so awesome. But so Emerson here has got, he's got a really high agility or something. So I'll say, hey, let's give you a category on agility. But in this case, he wanted something on dexterity. He got a 2 on dexterity, and this is when we rolled him up. And that is good dodging ability. He gets +1 to his dodge attribute. Well, that's great. He wanted that. Comeliness, he has a D reaction bonus +5. People see him. He's in his uniform. He's got his badge. He's already a good looking guy because an average attribute value is 10.5. If you're going by averages of dice rolls, actually it's more like 11, 12 because you reroll ones. But 16 is really good because the highest you can get is a 20 to start off with as a human. So yeah, he's also got a reaction bonus on top of that. That's really cool. Alertness down here, he has an L, and an L on alertness is cannot be surprised. That's awesome. That's really good. It helps a lot. So that's basically how mastery and categories work. So now let's go back into just general dice rolling rules on dice rolling. So obviously, you're trying to roll as low as possible to get as far under the skill as you possibly can. So you want to roll a 1. You're shooting for a 1, and you're trying to avoid 20s. Even though everything's random, you're still, you don't want to see that 20. So get D&D out of your mind. You don't want to see that 20 because a 20, no matter what your skill level is an automatic fail. Even if you have a 25 skill, if you roll a 20, that is an automatic fail. It's also, if you're swinging a sword and you roll a 20, there might be a chance that you're going to fumble your sword in addition to just missing your enemy. So don't want to get those 20s. On the other hand, a 1 is an automatic success, provided that what you're trying to do is physically possible. So if you're swinging a sword at somebody and you get a 1, that's an automatic success. Unless they, as a defender, also roll a 1, now you have 2 automatic successes. Well, who wins? Well, in a tie, the defender always wins. So keep that in mind when you're talking about 1s. Even if you have a 25 skill and their skill is only a 5, if you roll a 1 on attack and they roll a 1 on defense, it's still considered 2 automatic successes and the defender wins. So you wouldn't hit that person. Now, since 1 is such a special number and it's an automatic success, if you're rolling versus a skill, you get that 1 extra point as a little bonus. So if you have a 19 brawling skill and you roll a 1, you don't make it by 18, you actually make it by 19 because you get that 1 extra little bonus. Makes it a little bit harder for, Actually, nobody can defend you unless they rolled a 1, because a 1 is an automatic success. So let's say your sword skill is a 13 and their sword skill is a 25. If you roll a 1, you made it by 13, but it's still an automatic success. They roll a 2 and they make it by 23. So you made it by 13 and they made it by 23, but since you rolled a 1 and they didn't, you get an automatic success and you actually hit them. So there's no points that will spill over to do other things with, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you still hit them. And conversely, if they roll a 2 and make it by 23 to hit you and you defend and you roll a 1, that's an automatic success. They may have made their attack by 23 and you made your defense technically by 13. Since you rolled a 1, you still block them. So the takeaway on rolling is you want to roll below your level as far as possible. You want to roll a 1. A 1 is an automatic success, and then you get that extra 1 point as a bonus. A 20 is an automatic fail, no matter what. And ties always go to the defender. And sometimes the Game Master has to rule who is the defender if it's kind of vague and hard to determine. So now we get into the magic of changing dice rolls, which is something that the player characters can do, and sometimes the Game Master, but for the NPCs, not really though. The NPCs right now don't have a whole lot of ways of changing dice rolls, but the characters do, and that is in the spirit, again, of, not allowing for game masters that just railroad a game. This gives the players a little bit of control over the game itself. So remember, we have these 5 dynamic attributes, okay? And we'll go over these now. Luck is your ability to change your own dice rolls. Outer body luck is your ability to change other people's dice rolls and not your own. Yeah, it's called outer body luck. This was a long time ago. I made up these stupid names. Neural control is your ability to change your own dice rolls if it has something to do with like adrenaline, like a physical something. So if you're swinging a sword or you're blocking with a sword, you can add neural control to your dice roll. Mental control, or sometimes it's called mind control, is kind of like your willpower. It allows you to change your own dice rolls for things that are purely mental. So say I'm making you roll law, or I'm making, Brave Star here roll law, because he's trying to remember a really obscure law that's 200 years old, and maybe he saw it in a law book, while he's in the academy. And does he remember? Well, first of all, I could say make a knowledge roll, but his knowledge is only a 6 save. Doesn't have a very good chance of that. So he says, well, can I roll law? My law's a 14. I say, yeah, that's fine. Well, it's purely mental. He's just trying to bring back a memory. So he can, if he wants, he can spend luck on it. But since he can use luck for anything of his own rolls, why not spend mental control on it and see if he can use that to bump up his ability? So he chooses to do that instead. Okay, cool. Now, the thing with these 4, I'm not including the last one, I'm only including these 4. You have to spend your points before the roll. And the number of points you get is your save number. Okay? So when the session begins, you have 8 points. Well, Brave Star has 8 points of luck, 5 points of outer body luck, 4 points of neural control, 5 points of mind control. He can spend those throughout the game as he wants. He has to spend them before the roll, and he has to spend them based on the rules. Luck you can only spend on yourself, but any roll, any 20-sided dice roll. Outer body luck or outside body luck you can only spend on other people's rolls. Neural control can only be spent on yourself, but physical things, say you gotta lift something and it's really heavy, and so I'm making you do a strength check and you want to add these 4 points to your strengths and gives you better odds and stuff like that. Now, with these, you can spend them one at a time. You can say, I'm going to spend 1 point of luck on my law skill. I don't know why you do that, because you really don't know what you're going to roll. What if you roll a 16? So usually these first 4 are spent everything at once, like all 8 points on a roll, or all 5 points on a single roll, or all 4 points on a single roll, because you really don't know how well you're going to roll. The only time that might be different is, say, gambling doesn't work because you're rolling against other people. But, let's say he's rolling law and he's got a 14, but you automatically fail on a 20 anyway. So it doesn't do him any good to roll against anything higher than a 19. So let's say he's already spent all these and he only has luck. So he spends 5 of his 8 points on this because it doesn't do him any good to spend more. So that's just it. That's strategy that you'll learn as the game progresses and you spend them more and more and that kind of stuff. Now we get to this one, covert strength. Covert strength is considered by me, at least, to be the most important attribute in the game. More important than all of these. Covert strength are points right here that you can spend on any 20-sided dice roll after it has been rolled. So, say you're in a contest of skills and the game master's like, okay, he rolls against his sword skill and he made it by 16, and you roll your sword skill and you only made it by 17. So this guy hit you with 1 point. He hit you by 1 point. Well, you can go, I'm going to spend a point of covert strength on my own roll. So now, we both make it by 17 or whatever, and tie goes to the defender, so he didn't actually hit me. So covert strength is kind of usually spent onesie twosie, but I've seen characters spend all of them at once because they just need to. Now remember, it's your own rolls and it's other people's rolls. So if your, party member over here, your friend, if he gets cleaved in the face with an axe and the game master says, the bad guy made it by 4 and he only defended by 2, he gets cleaved in the face with an axe by 2 points. Well, you can go, I'm spending 2. I'm going to spend 2 on his roll. And so the defender wins and the axe misses altogether. Happens a lot, constantly. These point spends are kind of the backbone of JRAS, and there's a lot of strategy behind it that you will learn as you play. Now, you may be asking, if you're still caught up, how do you get these points back? Do they just come back at the beginning of each play session? Well, they do come back at the beginning of each play session, but they also come back during the play session. If your characters get about 6 hours of not sleep, but like just uninterrupted downtime where they're not being chased and they're not in danger of getting killed or falling off a cliff or out of a tree. If they're just kind of relaxing and things are pretty normal around them, about 6 hours later, all the points get restored. So let's say they're in a dungeon and they're locked in a room and there's something pounding on the door and scratching and trying to bite its way through the door. It may take 8 hours to get through the door. Those 6 hours aren't going to be relaxing enough to get your points back. But if it's the end of the day and they're chilling in the bar and nobody's trying to shoot them through the window with an arrow in the face, about 6 hours. They go over to the bathhouse and they go chill at the park. Yeah, 6 hours, even though they didn't sleep, that gets them all their points back. Okay, so I'm going to end this part here. I'm going to create another video that talks about more of the things on the sheet in more depth, just because my throat, my voice is starting to go out on me. I can feel it. But I hope I covered things well enough that you can actually start playing the game. So